Hey there, instructional leader. Welcome to the Catching Up with Casey show. If you are anything like me, then you envision collaborative learning communities in which the vast majority of educators are eager and inspired to go to work, feel valued and empowered while at work, and end each day with a great sense of purpose and fulfillment. And I believe this is possible if you have built cohesive, vision-driven teams. Teams that collectively move toward a common focus with leaders who are able to hold them accountable without micromanaging. And on this show, that's exactly what we talk about. Anything and everything that has to do with building cohesive, vision-driven teams. If you want to be part of the 30% who actually helps teams achieve district and campus goals, then you've taken a great first step in listening to this podcast. And if you're really serious about it, then you are going to reach out to me and see how we can work together to make that possible. Now, with all of that said, let's dive into today's conversation. Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 102 of the Catching Up with Casey show. As always, I'm excited to be here, but we're here kind of at a different time. And I'm going to go ahead and say, Catlin, who is my guest today, you've kind of encouraged me to start thinking about offering 2 times for my guest to come on. They can either choose like a noon lunch and learn time or an evening time. So thanks for opening up that realm of possibilities for me. Today, we are going to be talking with Dr. Catlin Tucker about elevating educational design with AI, and she is here to share about that and so much more. Catlin, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Casey, and for being flexible on the timing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what are we if we're not flexible as educators, right? We have to have that.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and what brings you to the show today.
Yeah, well, I have been in education for 24 years now. I started my career as a high school English teacher, have been an English teacher and an instructional coach, just an instructional coach. I got my master's in education, my doctorate, and now I work kind of all over supporting change in education that will hopefully help educators feel more effective meeting these kind of beautifully diverse groups of students that are in their classrooms, all of these different needs that they're kind of seeing pop up. So that's my work. And I get the privilege of working with folks who are heading into this profession in the Master's in the Arts of Teaching at Pepperdine University as well.
Very cool. Okay, so you've worn lots of hats. You're still wearing lots of hats,
yes.
But it seems like it all fits underneath that instructional umbrella.
Definitely. That's my sweet spot for sure.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, so I've just recently started on this show, beginning it with a this or that kind of activity. Okay. So we're going to do a couple of things. I'm going to ask you some this or that questions based on just life in general, and then a couple of this or that questions focused on teams and leadership. Are you ready? Okay. This or that, are you the kind of person who waits until your gas tank is on empty to get gas, like the light is on, or are you, I'm going to get gas 15 miles before it's out of gas?
Before. I'm not waiting for that light to come on. My dad drilled that into me as an early driver.
That's funny. So I'm the exact opposite. I will wait until the gas light comes on, and then I'm like, probably have 30 miles left. So let's just keep waiting. Okay, this or that. Do you prefer dessert before dinner or dessert after dinner?
Secret third option. I don't do dessert. I don't have a sweet tooth. I think my dessert's probably the glass of wine that I'm drinking with dinner.
I love it. Yeah. And okay, well, with that said, white wine or red wine?
White.
Oh, okay. I'm a red wine girl. Okay. So then let's talk about leadership and teams. Would you prefer this or that? Do you prefer to work with like an individual and really get into nitty-gritty conversation with an individual person, or facilitating really interesting team conversations?
Oh, that is a really good question. I think I personally enjoy the one-on-one deep dive, but saying that, I know that often the biggest impact actually comes with facilitating those team conversations. So,
Yeah, and it's so funny working with people because teams is my sweet spot. I mean, obviously that's
mhm.
really what this podcast is about. But it's so funny to listen to how people struggle sometimes facilitating team conversations because you just never know what's going to happen. And in an
Mhm.
individual conversation, I think there's a little bit more control that you have. Last one. Do you say data or do you say data?
Data.
And that's what we'll stick with. I've gotten to where I just say both at the same time, data, data.
I'm definitely not. I think both have come out of my mouth, but if I was to think of what I probably say more often, I think it's data.
Okay.
Watch, I'll say data on this show.
That's okay. I'll probably say it and then you'll say it right after me. So let's dive into today's true conversation. It's all about elevating educational design with AI. You have recently released a book, and I would love for you to tell us a little bit about that book and what caused you to write it.
Yeah. So I also work with a lot of leadership teams, coaching teams, entire like staffs of, educators. And my work has really focused on shifting instructional design. So how do we use technology strategically, allowing, teachers in rooms to spend time in that human side of work, really working with individual and small groups of students, because we do have this kind of increasingly diverse population that we're working with, lots of different needs and language proficiencies, learning preferences and interests. And it can be really daunting if the only instructional approach a teacher really has in their toolbox is that whole group teacher led, teacher paced approach to instructional design and facilitating learning. And yet, even though teachers know there's a lot of challenges with that whole group teacher led approach to designing learning, it's been a big ask to shift practice, right? With all of the things that educators are juggling, it can feel unrealistic for them to design differently, to design for small groups. And so when AI exploded on the scene, I was watching a lot of educators on Instagram who were very, very excited. And I get it. Planning is a time consuming part of this work. But there were kind of these videos that just showed, hey, if you throw this learning objective, you throw a standard in, it'll spit out a lesson, it'll spit out an entire unit. And I was like, really uncomfortable with this. Like, why would we allow this powerful kind of opportunity pass us by? Why would we leverage AI to simply spit out the same kind of learning experiences that we've been using, to really mixed results, quite frankly, for years and years and years? Why not help educators leverage AI to elevate their design work, to really get much more intentional, think about how do we actually create accessible, inclusive, and equitable learning experiences for these diverse populations in a way that we couldn't before AI, in like a fraction of the time. And so that was really where the book kind of blossomed out for me. It was this idea that now I could hopefully help teachers who were excited to shift practice, they wanted to try different things, be more effective and time efficient in doing so.
Yeah, that's awesome. And there are so many things that I think we could talk about in this conversation. And I would love for you, maybe not just yet, but later in the show, I would love for you to give a couple of examples of maybe what people might experience in the book as they're
Mhm.
reading that they could apply in the either in planning sessions with their teams or in the classroom. But I want to know really from like a leadership or instructional coach standpoint, how can they use AI to bring clarity to their work and cut through the noise of all of the overwhelming demands, especially as there are programs and programs piled on top of each other that they're having to push out to teachers?
I mean, the beauty of AI is just the capacity to hold so much information, synthesize it, track developments and information in a way that, like, I just don't think is really possible for us as human beings. And so, especially when I think about folks in education who are in leadership roles, it's this opportunity to really kind of create clarity about what are the priorities I'm working on, what within this priority bucket should I focus on first, second, third, like really getting intentional about where are we spending our time and energy instead of feeling a little bit like what happens in education, which is like this whack-a-mole of like, okay, I'll deal with this, but I'll come back to that part of it later, and I'll do this and this and this. And I think about my work as a instructional coach and just how often I would sit with teachers or teams of teachers or support a PLC and want to really help them understand how to do things like differentiate an instructional session, or what kind of informal data they could collect in a lesson to kind of inform the next lesson, or how do we make kind of or come up with construct specific choices. But my background was English language arts, right? And I might be sitting with a third grade science teacher or a ninth grade math teacher. And it's like, that's not my subject area expertise. I know the pedagogy. And now I have AI where I can sit with a teacher in any subject area, any grade level, trying to serve any population of learners. And I can use what I know as pedagogically sound kind of practices and instructional approaches paired with AI to say, hey, here's how we could do this for this lesson, targeting this standard for this grade level of learner. And that's so exciting from an instructional coach perspective.
Yeah. Would you agree? Because this is kind of what I have found. Like, I feel like either we have maybe two spectrums, right? On one end of the spectrum, we have teachers and or leaders. Really, it could be instructional coaches who are facilitating team planning, but on the one end we have people who haven't even toyed with AI and
Mm-hmm.
pairing it with their instruction, and on the opposite end we have almost like a dump it into AI, take it and run with it as is without internalizing it. So I want to know if you're seeing that and what your perspective is on that.
Yeah, I am seeing, well, I'm seeing the whole spectrum of kind of feelings about approaches to using AI. And there are, so interesting because there are educators who it's just another thing that they now have to deal with. And I get it.
Mhm.
Like technology is rapidly evolving, it's not going anywhere. And there's constantly this challenge of how do we stay on top of some of these things? And there are a lot of really exciting AI powered apps that we can use in the classroom with students. And some teachers are really leaning into that. And I think that's exciting. One of the things I wanted to focus on, and the reason I kind of approached this book the way I did, is for teachers or schools or districts that are not allowing AI in classrooms, they're taking a very conservative approach to it. We can still help educators to leverage that powerful kind of application for design, right? Where it's really helping them to design much more effectively and efficiently, and even take things like adopted curriculums that might feel a little rigid or might not have a lot of choice built into them or might not be serving certain students in their classroom, and adapt them with AI. But then I also see folks who are like, just to your point, throwing in a standard learning objective, like taking a lesson and just implementing it. And that really makes me nervous because it's so ironic. So many teachers are worried that students will let AI do the thinking for them and produce the work for them. And I'm like, but that's kind of what you're doing when you let AI just create the lesson for you, right? You have a degree of subject area expertise. You know your students in a way nobody else does. And AI can't design for your specific population of learners as effectively as you. And so for me, it's always this kind of partnership that I want to be emphasizing. Let's not let AI do the all of the design work and the creative thinking for us as educators either. So there has to be kind of this middle ground that I'm always striving for when I work with leadership teams and coaches and even educators who are trying to figure out how to maximize the power of AI in this work that we're doing.
Yeah. When you are working with those teams, like be it teachers or leaders, what is the biggest hurdle that they have to come across?
I think it's different, right? I think leaders are really concerned about things like privacy and kind of those logistical components of introducing something like AI to their stakeholders, whether it's concerned families, whether it's teachers who are feeling anxiety about, I don't really know how to use this effectively, I'm intimidated by using this, right down to students, which is like, we want you to have access to technology that is out in the world, but we also want to make sure that the systems and processes are in place that you're using it responsibly as a student. So leaders have to think about all of those pieces. I think for, educators, it's a little bit different. It's more, how do we, hopefully the concern is, how do we integrate this into the experience in classrooms in a way that's meaningful, and how do we explicitly teach students how to be responsible users of AI? And I think we absolutely should be doing that, because they're going to have access to this outside of school. But it's not something that a lot of teachers feel at this moment super equipped to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So let's go back to the book, because I want
Okay.
to know what some of your key components of the book are that
Mhm.
maybe are your favorite pieces of the book that you're hoping people will take away from it.
Well, just from a kind of a structural perspective, one thing to know is, we have a lot of people in education who don't necessarily have, because of their teacher credential programs or education programs, if they even went through one, because we also have a lot of folks in classrooms who didn't go through a program, right? That's kind of an increasing challenge in education. Well, we might not have that foundation in instructional design. We might just have whatever the curriculum is that we're given, or we might be kind of just cobbling things together from places like Teachers Pay Teachers and AI generated stuff. And that's concerning. And so in the book, it's really anchored in a design pathway that starts with kind of backward design, so that the desired results and the assessment strategies we're using are in alignment. Then we get down into universal design for learning and blended learning models, and how do we design so that we're being proactive, trying to remove barriers, collect informal data about where students are at. And even though we might universally design a lesson or a sequence of lessons to try to meet students' needs, we also know it's not going to work for everybody. So then the next layer of the pathway is, how do we be really responsive? How do we differentiate further and personalize further to meet student needs? And then the kind of bottom of the design pathway is really about those elements that we can add to the curriculum and into our design that help students build resilience, that allow them to persevere and be adaptable. So the goal is to really support educators with a really clear design pathway. But each of the chapters kind of has Katie, Dr. Novak, and I always start with like an anecdote, something that is like a real life story that connects to the chapter. Then we get into some of the strong pedagogical practices that underpin the chapter. And then we really want to model, what does it look like to interact with AI to do some of these design pieces? What questions are you asking? What prompts can teachers use, or curriculum designers or coaches use? So we wanted it to be really practical, grounded in strong pedagogy, but also really user friendly. Lots of examples of through the grade levels, subject areas, so teachers can kind of see this happening as we're talking about it.
Yeah, I love that. That's fantastic. And I could see this being extremely beneficial for lots of different roles of people, leadership, team members, teacher teams, down to people who are in the college classrooms, because they're going to be like, that's going to be a huge part of their lives as they
Yep.
move into teaching.
Yes. Yes. I mean, hopefully it shows up in their teaching programs, because
Yeah.
so often I work with educators where I feel like the things I hear about their experience before getting into the classroom isn't that different from my experience 25 years ago, which is troubling.
Agree. I think we could have an entire conversation about that.
Yes.
I want to talk about this term you keep dropping, and it's design. I've heard you say it multiple times in our brief conversation that we've had so far. And I've had conversations with other instructional coaches who, I'm just going to go ahead and put it out there. I am not a proponent of big box curriculums. I am
Mhm.
also not a proponent of scripted curriculums, only because what typically happens is they are placed in teachers' hands and they are told to teach it with fidelity, but we're not taking into account that most of these people who are taking these box curriculums maybe don't have a strong pedagogy or philosophy or a sound philosophy around education, because you don't know where they're coming from, what their background experiences are, etc. And I have other issues with it too. But I think sometimes what happens is when we think about utilizing AI, we assume that we can utilize AI and still not have to do the design work. And I know that it's not comfortable for some people. Like, it comes naturally to some and not naturally to others to design learning experiences for students. But it is still absolutely necessary to spend time doing the design work with your team. And what I hear you saying is we can leverage AI to help us with that design, but we can't allow it to completely take away the design from us.
Yeah, so you've brought up a few things that I think are really important to address. So when I work with educators, I highlight that as a teacher, we really have three main roles. We are designers of learning experiences, we are instructors with subject area expertise, and we are facilitators. We're those coaches sitting alongside students, helping them to refine and kind of hone their skills and conceptual knowledge. That design part of our work, I often compare it to the work of an architect. And the reason I do that when I talk about teachers as architects of learning experiences is the architect is there to create the structure, and the architect wants to make sure that building is going to be accessible. Anybody can enter and move around that space, right? And the same thing needs to be, I think, in the educator's mind, which is you are architecting this structure, this learning structure, but you're not going to do the building, right? Like, an architect doesn't grab a hammer and nails and start building the structure. That's the contractors and the subcontractors. And in the same way, I think our learning design should position students to be the builders of meaning. I think they should be wrestling with the concepts. I want them actively engaged in the learning process. But what happens is when we don't invest the time to architect a student-centered learning experience, we end up doing all the work and students end up in a passive consumptive role. So it becomes really important that, if I'm a teacher and I don't have a strong, kind of background or just an inclination to want to design, like, I just happen to love this part of the job, right? Designing learning experiences for me is super fun. But I get that that's not everybody's cup of tea. And so then that's where PLCs and coaching teams become so critical at helping teachers to really understand how to approach that work, have support as they do it. And part of what I wanted and Dr. Novak wanted to do in this book was to create something that felt not super theory rich, where you're like, oh, I can't even get into the application. There's just so much of that thick kind of theory in there. We wanted to make sure it was grounded in strong pedagogy, but that it was something that a teacher who's like, I want to do this better, could pick up, or to your point, a leadership team, a coaching team, to pick up, to elevate the design happening, and to use AI as a design thought partner, but not to just outsource design to the AI.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. I just keep imagining what this professional learning community could look like when they meet together if they are doing what you've just described. And it makes the difference between a good aligned campus and a great streamlined aligned campus who has a culture of clarity. But they have a culture of clarity because they've spent the time to do the design work together and they're just
Yes.
utilizing or leveraging AI. As you were talking, it kind of made me think about what I see happening a lot of the time is when we have these planning meetings. I'm not even going to call them professional learning communities because a lot of the time they're not. They're just planning meetings, but we're not really talking about the instruction. We're just talking about the topic that we're teaching, and we're mapping it out on the lesson plans. We're teaching this day, this day, this day, this day. Well, what happens if we say you can use AI to create your lessons for you is we are putting in the hands of AI what should be in the hands of humans who are teaching humans. And we're kind of leaving learning up to chance instead of leaving learning up to design, because I might put a lesson, like I might put a topic into AI and it spits out, maybe it could be a great lesson, but just like a scripted curriculum, just because it has the potential to be a great lesson does not mean that I'm going to effectively deliver that lesson. I have to understand the structure behind it, the why behind the structure. I have to understand why it's important that students have conversation, build the learning. Like, there are so many things that AI doesn't consider when it's spitting out this lesson, because you're the person that's giving it the instructions of what to create and do for you. And to your point, that is why our true professional learning communities who are having that discussion, that design work, is so incredibly important.
I agree. And I think one of the things I'll show educators, so some are creating their own curriculum, some are given a curriculum to use and to work with. And if they're using AI to create lessons, so I was working with a group of teachers and they were creating a lesson using Magic School, super popular right now, right? But almost every lesson that Magic School creates is in I do, we do, you do, right? It's like the instruction, it's the guided practice, it's the independent practice. And that's fine. But we know that's not going to serve all students. So what's actually interesting is when you take that whole group lesson, whether it's produced by a tool like Magic School or whether it's in an adopted curriculum, maybe you're a teacher and you have that same, because a lot of that adopted curriculum is written the exact same way with that gradual release. If you take that lesson and you actually put it in an AI chatbot and you start asking it to do very specific things, you can actually differentiate it. You can reimagine it for small groups, for students at different levels or with different language proficiencies. You can spin up supporting scaffolds and supports that students might need, deconstructed examples, exemplars, sentence stems, concept maps related to what you're doing. It's like so exciting. But it requires that you get over into that chatbot. You know what questions to ask. And I agree. Sometimes when, especially our teachers who have an adopted curriculum and they're told to teach it with fidelity, which it's more that phrase I have a problem with, because there's some adopted curriculum that I think has a lot of potential. But I also think educators need to be allowed to be creative and to make the adjustments necessary for the people who are in their classrooms. And so for me, it's like, do we know how to take one of those lessons and really like nudge it to go farther and to think more creatively and dynamically about it?
Yeah. So we could definitely say, don't take what AI generates at face value.
No, please don't.
Please don't. Let's probe a little bit further and dig deeper. So Pauline, hi Pauline. She says the more specific questions you ask, the better results you get. Yes.
Absolutely. The better the input, the better the output. So the more, your grade level, your subject area, the specific needs, the kinds of learning activities. Like, it was even cute. I was coaching a teacher. It was like fourth grade teacher, science teacher, and we wanted to do a pre-assessment. And she said, I love my group. They're really squirrely. They kind of need to move around. And so a traditional like pre-quiz not going to meet their needs. And so we go over to ChatGPT and we're like, here's the actual like standard we want to pre-assess. It's for this fourth grade group of students, but we want some examples of pre-assessment strategies that get them moving, that are interactive and fun. And it was just so exciting to see all of the different options. And we still had to choose one. And okay, so how do we facilitate this? Let's break it down into steps. But it's almost like we can now even use AI to be kind of our own little mini personalized professional learning facilitator if we know what questions to ask.
If we know what questions to ask. Yeah. So let's talk about how, if you are a PLC facilitator or you are the leader of a campus, how do you suggest that they just move the needle a little bit in the right direction so that people are using AI to enhance instruction?
I mean, when I go in and facilitate training sessions and they already have existing lessons, and the goal is let's do something within your zone of possibility. Let's not do the whole like learning pathway or design pathway. Let's really hone in on taking what you're doing right now and being more thoughtful about a few key drivers. So for me, that's data informed, differentiation, student agency. So in this lesson, let's think about what data, if any, would be helpful in informing how you plan to differentiate this lesson. And let's use AI to generate a pre-assessment strategy for this particular lesson. And then we can kind of get into all the creative kinds of pre-assessments that AI can suggest. Or you can go to an established tool, it can whip up a quiz, of course, but I really want them to see the possibilities. Then once we have that pre-assessment, so we're going to have a data informed part, now let's look at the instruction itself and the activities. How might we use AI to differentiate those a bit further, create some supports and scaffolds, and then let's build in one meaningful choice, one example of student agency. And similar to your this, that, I always say it's like a would you rather. Let's have one would you rather option that is construct specific. So I'm able to guide teachers in interacting with AI to kind of add these pillars of high quality design to a single lesson or a sequence of lessons in a way that helps them feel like, oh, that was doable. Didn't take too much time. I could totally see how this would benefit my students. And then you kind of get them, right? And they have like that small win. And now we can build on it because they're going to be more open to the AI design conversation.
Yeah, and I totally could see. Well, I could see a couple of things because you made me start thinking. I'm writing all kinds of notes down. But first, I could totally see, like, maybe not right now because we've kind of already started the year. I'm sure schools have so many things on their plates that they're trying to juggle and think about. But as the school year starts next year, as a leadership team, if you're thinking about what are the norms or expectations that we want to have for our planning meetings or faculty meetings or data review meetings, whatever it might be, PLC meetings, what are the norms we're going to have that have to do with utilizing AI to
Mhm.
help us to enhance our instruction for students? So I could see that, but then also I wonder, how I resort to ChatGPT. That's what I use all the time, and
Mhm.
I actually have the pro version just because I use it so much. But within that, you can create like chats for other people to use, right? So where you've already
Mhm.
put in like the guidelines for it, all of the details that it might need to know. I could see doing that for your school. Like, especially like if I'm thinking about a second grade coming together to plan, or they're having professional learning community meeting, and we want to utilize ChatGPT, but we want to put into it before we meet time and time again. We want to go ahead and put into it, what is our school vision and mission? When
Mhm.
we meet together, this is what planning looks like, or here are how our lessons are structured, or here's our area of focus. We're really focusing on engaging students with class and peer discussion. So you can put into it all of these things, and everyone's using this one chat to continue developing lessons together. Have you
Yeah.
seen
Well,
anybody do that?
yeah, I definitely have groups that will it's almost like putting into the chat, like, the guardrails to make sure the chat is as productive and on point as possible,
Yeah.
and you can feed resources into it, like, where are you kind of grounding this work or what kind of, you know, pedagogy or research is informing what you're doing, and
Mhm.
it's really interesting because to your point about the time of year, so I often will consult with groups that are like, "Hey, this is the curriculum that we have. We know it could be stronger. How do we kind of like before we embark on a new school year, how do we take the design pathway that, ultimately landed in this book and AI and start to kind of reimagine what we have so that we're doing it as a leadership or a curriculum kind of an instruction group that hopefully will make this much more user-friendly for teachers, give them a little bit more creativity and flexibility. We'll even highlight places where teachers might want to think about how they want to customize or reimagine an aspect of the curriculum to better serve and, hopefully support academic success for the populations of students at that school. And so this spring and summer is a really good time for leadership to be thinking about getting into that work instead of starting it at the beginning of a school year or mid-year when teachers are like, well, now I'm drowning in the actual day-to-day teaching responsibilities that I have to worry about.
Yeah, and preparing for end of year things. And, we know that all is happening right now. Even though it's still so early in the semester, that's what's on their mind. Yep. Okay, I don't want to close this conversation, but we're going to start to close this conversation. And there are a couple of things I want to ask you. First of all, tell our listeners, like if you want them to take away just one thing from this conversation today, what would that be?
That AI can help us to simplify, streamline, and elevate some of the really time-consuming tasks in education so that we can actually focus on more of the human side of this work and spend more time in that space, which is ultimately what I want. This book does talk about AI, but it's really serving the purpose of how do we let teachers do what humans do really well in classrooms and feel more effective and efficient.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And where can people find you? There are several different places I know of. I know of, first of all, I want you to be sure you talk about the podcast that you host. And then if they wanted to work with you or find you in other ways, what are the avenues they could use to do that?
Definitely catlintucker.com is your one-stop shop. So if you're looking for curriculum consulting support or speaking or coaching or any of that stuff, you can find it there. I also blog every single week. So I was a blogger way before a podcaster. My blog gets way more traffic than my podcast at this point. And so I share a lot of free resources there for leaders and coaches and teachers. I do host The Balance, which is an educational podcast. It's been a few years now. And then, my books and stuff are easy to find online. You can get to them through my website too.
Yeah. And all of that will be in the show notes. So you guys can, maybe not on YouTube, but if you go over to the podcast, Spotify or on iTunes, you'll see those show notes and get links to all of those things that Dr. Tucker just shared with us. So Catlin, this has been a great conversation. One of those that I'm like, well, we could just carry on, right? I appreciate you so much. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me, Casey. It was super great to join you.
All right. We'll chat with you later.
Right.
Okay, guys, I am so excited that you came and joined this conversation. I want to leave you with a couple of things. Number one, be sure you are going over to Amazon and checking out Dr. Tucker's book. I think with Katie Novak is who she wrote it with. So be sure you go check that out on Amazon. Also, I have been sharing this every episode for the last few episodes, but if you have not registered for CEC 2025, you're going to want to go check that out. I'm going to be the opening keynote speaker for this conference. I'm super excited. Yes, it is a special education conference, but we are all involved in teaching our exceptional children. So be sure you're checking that out. They're going to have lots of really great sessions, and it's a really popular conference to go to, so you can make lots of connections. And then finally, be sure you are checking out my book, The Craft of Clarity, so that you can get really clear about where your school is headed and exactly how they're going to get there. This has been such a great conversation with you guys today. I will check you next time. Hey there, thanks for joining this episode. I would love for you to do me 3 solid favors before you head out. Number 1, subscribe to this show. I've got a lot of great guests and content coming up, and I don't want you to miss any of it. Number 2, share this show. Share it with your like-minded colleagues and friends and those leaders who are eager to build cohesive, vision-driven teams. And finally, connect with me on all the social media platforms. You can find me at Catch Up with Casey on Instagram, YouTube, and LinkedIn. Until next time, go off and create teams that leave people feeling inspired, empowered, and eager for more each day.